All right. So, Dr. Finkelstein, thanks for joining us.
You,
You've written about Israel using a strategy of deterrence both towards Gaza and its other neighbors since 1967. What is that strategy, and why does Israel especially rely on it?
um, I don't think uh, it's useful to speak in very global or abstract terms. Depending on circumstances, Israel will adopt different tactics and also different strategies. But in general, it can be said that the Israeli strategy is to terrify the Palestinians and their other and neighboring Arab countries into submission uh, by using uh, targeted and indiscriminate force in order to inflict as much death and destruction as possible. It's pointless in the case of Israel to use the some of the categories that are typically used in human rights reports. So, for example, it's often said that Israel uses disproportionate force. Israel is not using disproportionate force in the sense that it's using more force than is necessary in order to achieve its political aim. That's what disproportionate force means. When you use more force than is necessary to achieve your military objective. First of all, most of the time, Israel doesn't have a military objective. Israel has a political objective. And the political objective is to terrorize the civilian population, not the military opposition, the civilian population into submission. And so it's not as if it's using more force than is necessary to achieve a military objective. In fact, it's using indiscriminate and targeted force or um, targeted force in order to achieve a political objective. And the political objective is to terrorize the civilian population into submission, and that's called deterrence capacity. It has to be said that it seems as if, I can't say for certain, but it's beginning to seem as if that strategy is now at a turning point because there is the fear now that Iran and its allies, in particular the Hezbollah, have accumulated sufficient deterrence capacity of their own that Israel can no longer carry on in this kind of reckless Genghis Khan, Attila the Hun type behavior. They are reaching a point where, or it seems as if, they've reached a point now where Hezbollah and Iran have accumulated a deterrence capacity of their own. So there was an interesting article yesterday, incidentally, in Haaretz, the main liberal, to the extent that there is a liberal community left in Israel, and that's a question mark, the main liberal newspaper in Israel, and a prominent professor of chemistry, he said, it's time to close down Dimona. Dimona is their nuclear reactor, which built or enabled the creation of Israel's nuclear arsenal. And he said it's time to close it down because it seems clear the Iranians can target it successfully. And Syed Nasrallah has several times said, we can target your ammonium factory. I think it's ammonium. I could be mistaken, but I think it is near Haifa. And he's hinted that we can target Dimona. So watch your step. And these threats appear to have a realistic basis. So I think we may be, as we're doing this show, we may be at a turning point where Israel's deterrence capacity, as it's called, and deterrence capacity, as the former Israeli general and then Prime Minister Ariel Sharon, otherwise known as the Butcher of Beirut, as Ariel Sharon put it, deterrence capacity means the Arab fear of us. And that fear was based on the capacity for indiscriminate and targeted mass death and destruction. And I'm beginning to wonder whether that strategy has now been exhausted and we might be at a turning point. What Israel will substitute for it, it's probably going to be what the strategy was during the Cold War in the United States, what was called MAD, mutually assured destruction. Namely, if you target us, we're going to efface you from the map. And they said, if you target us, we'll efface you from the map. And that was called MAD, mutually assured destruction. And it seems as if Iran and Israel have now reached, at the military level, a point of parity, where it may be from deterrence capacity, it's going to be MAD, mutually assured destruction. But that will put severe limits on Israeli power. It's never had that problem of having to defer to another side's deterrent capacity. It never had that problem. It was always the bully on the block. And now, it seems things are changing a little. And plus the fact that as Nasrallah, Sayed Nasrallah, the head of the Hezbollah, put it in a recent speech, he said, and I think it's true, Nasrallah is an extremely shrewd guy. I think he's the shrewdest political leader, certainly on the world stage today. And I think he's, for his age, as well as the fact that Lebanon is a relatively small entity, he has that kind of shrewdness and mental versatility of a Mao Zedong, a general, a thinker, and steeped in an ideology which I think is very rigid, like Mao's. I think Mao's was more enlightened than Hezbollah's, but that's a personal preference. But it's a very shrewd mind, Nasrallah. Nasrallah has accomplished something that no Arab leader has ever done. He has grasped through hard work, conscientiousness, moral seriousness. He understands the Israeli mentality. He understands them completely. It's kind of scary, actually. He does his homework. He reads all the Israeli newspapers or has them translated for him by a very efficient and, in the positive and negative sense, a fanatically committed following. In the positive and negative sense, fanatically committed following. I've met the people. You don't want to be in a battlefield with them. You don't even want to match wits with them. They're smart, and they bring to bear all of that mental power for their cause. You know, Israel, through its murderous abuse of power, has created an army of fanatics which will destroy it if need be. That's why, in my opinion, the Israelis have never eliminated Nasrallah. They know where he is. You know, Israel has a very efficient spy system. Lebanon is a very small place. They know where he is. They could target him. But they know, because of that following of his, you target Syed Nasrallah, and it will bring on Armageddon. It will. I mean, I know this sounds like apocalyptic thought, but I think the Israelis think the same thing as me. That's why they don't touch him. They know that army of his, those followers of his, worshipers of his, you touch one hair on Syed Nasrallah, and you can kiss Israel goodbye. We will do everything in our power to our dying day to make sure we revenge his death. And so he's a very smart guy. You don't want to tangle with him on the battlefield. On the battlefield, Israel will never again invade Lebanon. They do not want to tangle with the Hezbollah. Now, Nasrallah said in a recent speech, he said Israel now has a Hollywood army. It's not a real army anymore. Of course, they can wreak massive death and destruction, but via computer. They're very good at playing computer games with human beings, killing them en masse, ruthlessly, heartlessly, but with a computer, not on the battlefield. And so Nasrallah made the interesting point in his last speech. He said every time Israel tangles with somebody, say in Lebanon or elsewhere, they always occupy a piece of the land, a buffer zone. They claim we created a buffer zone. He said in the last time when Israel sent 2 drones into Beirut and targeted a Hezbollah installation, Nasrallah said there's going to be revenge. And Nasrallah's whole reputation is kind of like Bernie's reputation, Bernie Sanders, a man of his word. When he says it, Israel knows it's going to happen. And so Nasrallah said for the first time, Israel did not create a buffer zone in Lebanon when Nasrallah started to issue his threats. He said they created a buffer zone inside Israel. They cleared 5 to 8 meter, I forgot exactly how much, so don't quote me. I don't want to be quoted on it. But they created a buffer zone on their side because they were afraid of the retaliation. The fact of the matter is, Israel is an alt-right country. It's not an alt-right state. You have to be careful about the distinction. Right now in the United States, we have an alt-right leader. But for every Trumpian, there is a Sanders supporter. In my opinion, if 2016, if the whole primary system weren't rigged against Bernie, he would have not only won the primary, he would have won the election. So our country's, split 50-50. You take the case of the UK. Yes, there's an alt-right, people like Johnson, who's an oaf, and Farage, but there's also a Jeremy Corbyn. The country is split. In the case of Brazil, yes, there's a Bolsonaro, but there is a Lula and the People's Party. The country is split. Israel is not split. Israel is an alt-right, not state. It's an alt-right country. There is a right, a far right, and an alt-right. There's no left in Israel. There's nothing even remotely approximating a left, except these liberal enclaves in Tel Aviv. That's it. Who count for what? 10 or 20% of the population at most at this point. So it's an alt-right state, but it's also a Western state. Israelis, yes, it's fun to kill Arabs. with PlayStation computer game, and they like it. It's fun, they kill Arabs, but they don't want to fight in the battlefield because that means you might get killed. Now, I'm not saying it because I'm a hero and they're cowards. I'm just saying it factually. They want to go to nightclubs. They want to party. They want to go clubbing. They love to go traveling. Everybody in the world says they're the most obnoxious tourists when they do go travel. It's true. You have to understand because they're used to ransacking people's homes. That's for them. Everybody in Israel is a democratic state in many ways. It's a citizen army. So every citizen has passed through the army and is used to going into Palestinian homes, whether it's in the West Bank or in Gaza, ransacking, smashing, destroying. That's their mentality. So if you look at the polls, when countries are asked, where's the last country you would like, who are the people from the last country you'd like to visit? Everyone always says Israelis because they carry on like it's the West Bank. But they like to party, they like to club, they like to travel, they like to be tourists, get to ransack somebody's home abroad, but they don't want to fight because they don't want to die. They're westernized. They're not fanatics. They want to live. They want to have a good time. So Nasrallah said it's a Hollywood army. Israel, in order to protect itself from the Hezbollah, from Nasrallah's claims that we're going to get revenge. You attack us, it's going to be tit for tat. They put mannequins in their jeeps and tanks as decoys. They were terrified, No one, Israelis don't want to die. So that too is a turning point. At the technical level, the Iran arsenal is now a real deterrent. Look, Iran is a 5,000, 3,000, I don't know, year civilization. They're very smart. Iran is not Saudi Arabia. As Nasrallah said about the Saudis, somebody said that we're going to get English lessons in Saudi, and Nasrallah said English lessons. They need Arabic lessons. These are complete imbeciles. The Saudi regime, parasites. Iran is it is a repressive government. I'm not going to deny it. But remember, the Soviet government was also very repressive under Stalin. But they put together some real scientists. The Stalin, a very repressive regime, but they had a real team of scientists, industrially way behind the United States, but they went tit for tat when it came to nuclear technology. Russians, a very rich culture, very smart people, and Stalin gave them enough leeway in their technological fields. They came up with the atom bomb, the hydrogen bomb, pretty soon after the U.S. And then right through the 70s, of course, the U.S. was able to outspend them and eventually destroy the system because too much of the resources were going to the military. Had the resources been rechanneled civilian, the regime may have lasted longer. Who knows? I don't know. But the point is, Iran, they're very smart. By the way, as a factual matter, everyone always talks about how the Muslim regimes are so repressive to women and women are so oppressed in the Muslim regimes. Well, the fact of the matter is, no women in the world, anywhere in the Western world, remotely perform in math and science at the level of the Iranians. The overwhelming number of Iranians in higher mathematics, the postgraduate degrees, are women. Very impressive, very impressive. They have really mobilized all of their human power, not manpower, human power in the math and science. And so don't kid yourself. You got a real foe there now. So both at the level of on the battlefield and at the military technological level, Israel has a challenge now. And it's hard to see how it's going to be able to retain its deterrent capacity strategy, except against starving civilian populations, which are blockaded, like Gaza. And in Gaza, you know, it's an interesting point. Even with Gaza, just before the first, not the last election, but the penultimate election, just before it, there was some rocket fire from Gaza, which I can't remember, hit one of the Israeli cities. Normally, that would have been the pretext for Israel to go in and wipe out Gaza again. This time, it was 1 week before the election. And it was interesting. Netanyahu did not go in because he recognized you can wreak massive death and destruction, but once you go in with ground troops, problems arise. In the last Israeli attack, major attack, Operation Protective Edge, 67 Israeli soldiers were killed, which is a very high number for Israel. You know, in the attack before it was 10, this was 67. And killing Israeli soldiers is very bad PR for a prime minister. So he held back because he knew it could go wrong and cost him the election. So even tiny Gaza has its own, in its own way, I don't want to overrate it, but it has its own deterrent capacity now because the Israelis don't want to fight. And the Arabs, I'm using the plural now because it includes Hezbollah and Hamas. They have developed a strategy. The strategy is you fire these cheap, really insubstantial rockets. They're basically fireworks. You fire them into Israel, deluge Israel with them. As a military force, it's meaningless, it's fireworks. But it presents a political problem because you have to show that you can stop them. The problem with these short-range rockets, as they're called, I don't believe they're rockets, that's beside the point. The problem with the short-range rockets is you cannot eliminate them from the air. You can eliminate the medium range and the long range, but the short range, because it's just one guy coming out of a hole, you can only eliminate them by sending in ground troops. And the Hezbollah and Hamas know they don't want to send in the ground troops because then soldiers die because the soldiers don't want to fight. And so they just keep firing until it becomes a political problem and you have to go in. But if you go in, you don't want to fight with Hezbollah. Believe me, I met the people. There was one guy, he was my driver when I was going on the tour of the South. He looked exactly like an Arab Mr. T. He was like 6 feet tall, 6'5" tall, and 6'5" round. And it was all muscle. And he was so focused. I said to him, you know, buddy, I had a lot of troubles back in the US today. So I think I'm going to take you with me home. Actually, I think if you were ever on the battlefield and the Israelis fired the RPGs at you, they would just bounce off your chest. I mean, they're serious. They're serious. That is serious, those folks. You don't want to fight with them. You know? I asked him, what is it like to fight with Israeli on the battlefield? And he said to me, look, when they come in behind their tanks, they're all very brave. But the moment they have to come out from behind their tanks, they're very, very afraid. I fault them because I don't have physical coverage. I'm not proud of it, but I'm not going to lie either. So I don't really fault them, the Israelis. They want to live. But we have to be realistic. The Hezbollah, they have a bigger goal than to live.
Mm.
As I said, they're fanatics in the admirable sense, and they're fanatics in the scary sense. And you don't want to tangle with them.
You mentioned how Israel has targeted civilians at an especially high rate. And that was one of the things that really stood out to me in your last book, Gaza, an Inquest into Its Martyrdom, is just the brazenness of
the murderousness.
Right, but in the language specifically of documents around Operation Cast Lead, probably one of the better known ones, but then also other operations. Just the way that it explicitly targets civilian populations without any kind of jargon or protection for it. Could you talk a little bit about that?
It's an interesting point because Cast Lead 2008 to 9, August 26, 2008 to January 17, 2009, was the last time they actually used that brazen language. Mm-hmm. As you correctly point out, Ryan, they were very forthright. We're targeting the civilians. We are going to decimate them, and we're going to teach them a lesson for what Hezbollah did to us in 2006. They didn't even care about the Gazans. They wanted to just demonstrate their overwhelming firepower, because after Israel invaded Lebanon in 2006 and suffered a major defeat, Nasrallah started to ridicule them. Mm-hmm. And that's the last thing they want, because they want to restore the deterrence capacity, the Arab fear of them. So they figure, we're going to restore it in Gaza. And they kept saying, this is revenge for Lebanon. And they carried on like really madmen, lunatics, murderous gangsters like Genghis Khan, Attila the Hun. What happened was interesting. After the Operation Cast Lead, there was the Goldstone Report. Richard Goldstone, who was a South African jurist, Jewish, a Zionist, a lover of Israel. He heads a UN commission which issues a devastating report on Operation Cast Lead, saying that the Israeli attack was designed to punish, humiliate, and terrorize the civilian population. That's the words: punish, humiliate, and terrorize the civilian population. Not military, it was directed at civilians. And there were all the statements, as Ryan pointed out, that the Israelis had made in public, which is how they always carried on. Because in your language, correctly, they're so brazen, so arrogant and brazen, and they live in this bubble where you can say anything about Arabs, But now came the Goldstone Report, and there was problems looming. There could be prosecutions for war crimes and crimes against humanity. The Goldstone Report was eventually killed, in my opinion, but I can't prove it. You've read the book or parts of it. It's a hard book to read. I think through Israeli machination. They got dirt on Goldstone, or some member of his family forced him to retract the report. But during Operation Protective Edge in 2014, you found very few statements like that. It had changed. Israelis, to some extent, they are adaptable, especially when it's their head on the chopping block. If you recall, after Operation Cast Lead in 2008-9, Israelis had a lot of trouble traveling. When Tzipi Livni went to the UK, she was stuck at the airport because of this principle in international law called universal jurisdiction. That is, there are certain laws that international laws. If you break them, any country or every country is responsible to see that these principles are enforced. That's universal. So, the Spanish prosecutor uses it a lot, that principle. His name just slips my mind. Maybe you remember it. And now they had trouble traveling. So they were much more careful during Protective Edge at the verbal level. At the ground level, the destruction during Protective Edge was on a totally different order. It was sheer madness. These are lunatics. It's a lunatic state. It's an alt-right country. Mm-hmm. The reason Netanyahu, since he's began office 2008, I can't remember what year, or no, 1990s, maybe 1990s, I don't even remember anymore. But he's always surrounded with scandals. There are always scandals with Netanyahu. He's like a Trump. The Israelis keep re-electing him over and over and over again. And you know why? He's an obnoxious, racist, Jewish supremacist, loudmouth. And when the arrogant, and when the Israelis look at him, they see themselves. They see their reflection. That's us. Their slogan is, Bibi is us. And so they don't care about the scandals. So long as things are going okay, we like Bibi. That's why Israel, if you look at the polls, Israel is one of maybe a couple of countries in the world. It depends on the poll. I want to be careful. It's one of the only countries in the world where the population loves Trump. Not because they say, because he's pro-Israel. No, that's not why. Because he's just like Bibi. He's an arrogant, obnoxious, loudmouth supremacist. You know why they hated Obama? No, Obama was the most pro-Israel president in American history. He gave them $40 billion over 10 years. There's never been anything like it. They hate Obama. You know why? Because he's black. Because he's black. They're such racists, just like they hate the African refugees. They hate Obama because he's black. And they just have this incredible white, but also Jewish. It's a kind of a lethal alloy of supremacy. Here is this effing Netanyahu coming into our Congress, not that I'm a patriot, but coming into our Congress because he's going to tell us the dangers posed by Iran that Obama doesn't understand. He doesn't understand. Our Defense Department, our scientists, our whole military establishment, to whom we pumped in the whole freaking federal budget, they don't understand. We need Bibi to explain it to him by holding up a cartoon that looks like it's out of Looney Tunes to explain Iran. They're such racists. That's why they hate Obama. And that's why they love Trump. And that's why they love Bibi. Because they look at him and they see themselves.
All right, so in the Holocaust industry, you explain how, before the Six-Day War in 1967, American Jewish intellectuals and American power more broadly, they didn't pay much attention to Israel. Why did this relationship change after the June War, and how drastic was that change?
Well, the main reason was that Israel had proved itself to be a formidable military power. The fact of the matter is, of course, you two guys are way too young to remember, but the big threat in the 1950s was what was called radical Arab nationalism. The newly emerging countries from the third world, and there were all sorts of pretty, for their time, I don't want to in retrospect, one has to reevaluate. But for their time, they appeared to be quite radical, independent, and in many cases, anti-West. And the main figures of that movement were Tito from Yugoslavia, Nehru from India, and Nasser from Egypt. And there was the fear that the Middle East, which was American turf in the eyes of the US, British American, but eventually it transitioned. The British Empire collapsed after World War II, and it transitioned to US. The US displaced the British. It was American turf. But there was the fear that the radical Arab nationalists would carve an independent path to modernity, and that the US would be edged out. And as I said, the embodiment of that idea and ideal was Gamal Abdel Nasser in Egypt. And so the US, it attempted sometimes to try to buy off Nasser, sometimes to depose Nasser. It was a balancing act. And Nasser proved to be more intractable than they hoped. And so they had to get rid of him. And the fact of the matter is, in the 1967 war, Israel destroyed radical Arab nationalism by humiliating the Arab world, the defeat it inflicted on Egypt. Nasser, as I said, you have to assess things in retrospect. He was a blowhard. It was an air balloon. Israel took a pinprick. The whole thing, the whole war was over actually in about an hour. The only reason it lasted 6 days is because it became a land grab. Israel decided we'll take the West Bank, we'll take Jerusalem, we'll take Golan Heights, and we'll take the whole Sinai. But the war was over maybe even in about 20 minutes, because the whole Nasser Air Force was on the ground when Israel launched its attack and wiped out the Air Force. And now the Egyptian army had no cover. There was no Air Force anymore. And so it became what Walter Rostow, on the first day of the war, he called the June 1967 war, he called it a turkey shoot, and which was what it was. It's not a war, the turkey shoot. And so now Israel had established itself as a strategic asset for the United States, as it was called, a strategic asset for the United States, because it kept the Arabs in line with its deterrence capacity, the Arab world's fear of it. American Jews, up until the 1967 war, they were making it in the United States. I'm from that generation, so I remember it very well. Jews were fantastically, unbelievable success in the United States. I'll just give you a personal example. I attended James Madison High School in Brooklyn, okay? My high school, Bernie Sanders went to my high school. Chuck Schumer, leader of the Senate, went to my high school. I don't know if you know this person, Judge Judy. She went to my high school. Carole King, we used to love. Sometimes I feel like a natural woman. You know that song?
Mm-hmm.
My high school. 5 Nobel laureates. Five. My high school. They're all Jewish. The Kaplan preparation. The Kaplan prepare you for the SAT and the GP. Yeah. The Kaplan course. You know it, Zach?
Yeah.
Kaplan's daughter was my class. He was a neighbor of mine. It all started in our neighborhood. The Kaplan, Stanley Kaplan was his name.
Okay.
All Jewish. Everyone Jewish. The only exception, somebody who you would know, was Chris Rock, who went to my high school, but he dropped out. So Jews were making it. They didn't need, Israel was like a little backwater. It was like Tuscaloosa, Alabama. That was Israel. Very Spartan, very simple, poor. These Jews were going places. So Israel meant nothing to them. America was their dream. They were going to, and they did, realize the American dream. Now, the other thing was, historically, Jews have always feared the bogey of dual loyalty. That's always been the charge against Jews, that they're not really loyal to their state, that they're loyal to other Jews. The Jews constitute a nation, a people apart, and all of that. And so there's always the fear of being accused of dual loyalty. Jews always harbor that fear. And before 67, Israel wasn't a US ally. In fact, Israel was formally, before 67, I'm not saying concretely, but formally, it was a socialist country, famous for its kibbutzim, communes. Its leaders belonged to what was called back then the Second International, the Socialist International. And Israel's main opposition was called the Mapam, M-A-P-A-M. The dominant party was called the Mapai, M-A-P-A-I, which was socialist. The opposition, the Mapam, was communist. It was very pro-Soviet. So that wasn't American Jews' cup of tea, because it could raise the dual loyalty issue. After 1967, for American Jews, by being pro-Israel, you became pro-American, because Israel was serving American interests. Israel was our strategic asset in the Middle East. So Israel, being now pro-Israel, was not only not an embarrassment or a source of fear, it became a source of pride. Moshe Dayan was going to teach the Americans. He was the famous general from the 67 war. He wore a patch. Jews love that. A Jewish pirate. No, because, you have to remember the image of American Jews and European Jews was somebody like Woody Allen. The horn-rimmed glasses, cerebral, kind of a nebbish, we call it in Yiddish, a nebbishy type. That sort of means somebody who's a kind of a dork, a nerd or a dork. That's Woody Allen. And suddenly there's this Israeli general who's got a patch, Moshe Dayan, and he's a notorious womanizer. This is like so exciting for American Jews. They're fighters, they're hip, they're womanizers. So the American Jews really sucked it up. And of course, Israel always projected this image of being so pious and so humanist and caring so much about human life. So they were both pirates and philosophers at the same time. And that worked. It worked until now. Now it's changed quite a lot in the interim, which is a long interim. It was 50 plus years. It's changed a lot, and mostly because of two factors. Israel has moved much more to the right. The piousness has kind of evaporated. And there was the factor of Trump. Trump was a very big factor in the change of American Jewry, because American Jews tend to be in the liberal democratic end of the spectrum. And there's no one they hate more than that lout and loudmouth and obnoxious Donald Trump. And who's Trump's biggest ally? Netanyahu and the Israeli people. They love him. And so it's created a real conflict for American Jews, because to embrace Israel is to embrace the alt-right. And most American Jews are not willing to go there. They're not willing to go to the alt-right. They'll go a distance, but not alt-right. I don't know how much you guys follow politics. It's very noticeable that the whole leadership of the anti-Trump movement has been led formally by Pelosi, Nancy Pelosi. Chuck Schumer, who's more powerful than her in many ways, he's the senior person in the US Senate. He's been very quiet. And the reason, in my opinion, he's been very quiet is because if he aligns with the anti-Trump forces, which includes people like AOC and Ilhan Omar and all of that, he's going to have a clash with his main donor base, which is right-wing Jews. And he doesn't know what to do. If he doesn't go along, then he's been outed as a closet Trumpist, so to speak. But if he does go along, remember when Trump recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, Schumer said, that was my idea. He took my idea, you know? But that doesn't play well now with the Democratic Party, because so many of them recognize Israel as being alt-right. And so he has a problem between maintaining his leadership on the one hand in the party and placating Israel, appeasing Israel, and keeping his donor base. His donor base is all Wall Street and extreme right-wing Jews. The Adelson types, Sheldon Adelson types. In his case, it's Saban, the Adelson equivalent in the Democratic Party, or Saban, I'm not sure how to pronounce his name. So now we, American Jews, in particular, the under 30 generation, your generation, the support for Israel is very thin. What, you're going to support Trump? No, they're not going there. The Jews, especially younger ones, are just way too liberal to go there. So that's another turning point. Mentioned two turning points. We mentioned at the military level, there's been a significant shift, and now there's been a significant shift also within the American Jewish community. And I don't think that's going to change much, because the Israelis, they are like South Africa. These are very entrenched, hardened, thick-skinned racists. They're not going to change. It's a very ugly place, Israel. I'm not saying it does more evil than other countries in the world. It doesn't have the capacity to do more evil. But proportionate to its size, it does clearly more evil than any other country in the world. And the people are just a nasty piece of work. Now, you may say that's racist, that's a generalization. Well, is anybody going to dispute, especially you guys, Was it racist and was it stereotyping to say whites in the American South on the eve of the civil rights movement, they were nasty pieces of work? Right. Yeah, there were some exceptions, but they were so marginal. They were so marginal. You could generalize about the American South. I'm not praising the North because there are hypocrites with a capital H, but the American South, you can't generalize. I remember one, he was an attorney general. I can't remember his name. There's a very excellent documentary, which you guys should make a point of watching, called Freedom on My Mind, about the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC. And its great leaders, Bob Moses, James Foreman, John, what's his name from the, from Atlanta.
Okay. Or Ralph Abernathy, or?
Oh, no, the guy who's in Congress now. John.
John. What are you talking about?
He's.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, he's in the news all the time. Older, he's around 75.
John Lewis.
Yeah, John Lewis.
Oh, yeah.
I can't stand the guy now, but he was genuine. He was really heroic back then. He's a,
right.
You can't take, we can't take away facts. In any case, one associate with Kennedy at the time, he said, describing the South, he said, I never forget the phrase. He said, that was mean country. Mississippi, Alabama, that was mean country. And that's Israel now. It's mean country. And you are allowed to generalize because people are so stupidly politically correct. What is a stereotype? A stereotype is the pejorative usage for a generalization. When you don't like a generalization, you call it a stereotype, right? Mm-hmm. And what's a generalization? It's something that's generally true. Were whites in the American South generally deep-seated racists? Is that a fair generalization? Or are we going to say, oh, that's not right, it's a stereotype? A stereotype is the pejorative version of a generalization. And a generalization is something that's generally true. And yes, it's generally true that whites in the American South during the civil rights movement and before, mean country. And you can say the same thing about Israel. They don't get special linguistic immunities because they're Jews. Mean country.
That might be a good segue into another question. In an article for Jacobin that you and Jamie Stern Wiener wrote, you said that the only morally sane question presented by the situation in Gaza is, does Israel have the right, in the name of self-defense, in quotations, to poison 1 million children?
Yeah.
It is a sad commentary that this sample question has not just been sidestepped, but is not even visible in the current debate. And you go on to explain what you mean by Israel does not have a right to self-defense from Gaza. Could you explain that for people listening?
Okay. And that's a timely question for me, strange as it may sound, because right now I'm reading a giant biography of Frederick Douglass, the former slave turned abolitionist after he won his freedom. And the question arose in the 1850s in America, in Missouri, in Mississippi. There was the fugitive slave law. And the fugitive slave law meant whites had the right to send out people to catch African Americans who had escaped slavery and return them back. into slavery. And Douglas had to deal with the question of the right of resistance when these slave catchers, came north to try to drag the whites back, or drag the slaves back. Now, up until the 1850s, Douglas believed in the garrison. Garrison was a famous abolitionist. He believed in the doctrine of non-resistance. You don't fight back. Douglas changed his position. He called them, I want to read more about it. Actually, it inspired me. I may sit down in my old age and read Douglas's collected works because I'm curious about it. Although it's a big burden, I suspect it's very large, his collected works. He called them biped hellhounds, these slave catchers. Biped, two-legged hellhounds. And he said, of course you have the right. And he said, you should kill them, kill a lot of them to teach them a lesson. Now, that question doesn't even arise in Gaza because they've been using nonviolent resistance.
Right.
And you have to ask yourself the question. Gaza has been under a blockade since January 2006, since the day they won the Hamas won the election. A medieval blockade. It's now 13 years. The place is, by all reckonings, unlivable. 97% of the water in Gaza is undrinkable. Nobody can go in, nobody can go out. And you're telling me Gaza, which is described even by the UK's conservative prime minister, not Jeremy Corbyn, conservative prime minister, as an open-air prison. Gaza, which is described by what was, before his passing, Baruch Kimmerling, Israel's leading sociologist, the biggest concentration camp in the world. And you want to tell me that these snipers are lined across the border of Gaza, that they have the right to keep these Palestinian 1 million of the 2 million are children, that they have the right to use armed force to keep them confined in a concentration camp? Is that what you're telling me? You're telling me that under international law, you have the right to confine a whole population inside a concentration camp, and that these people don't have the right, unarmed, to break through the gates of Gaza, the concentration camp gates? Are you telling me if my parents, both of whom were in the Warsaw Ghetto, and they managed to break out of the ghetto, are you telling me that the Nazi guards had the right to kill them? That is so insane. And then, when I read Douglas, and I haven't read the details because it's a very large biography, it's like 800 pages, and it deals with all aspects of his life. But when I read Douglas and I saw biped hellhounds, yes, that's what those people are, who are firing on the children inside a concentration camp, who are trying to break free from an unlivable place. They are biped hellhounds. Now, Douglas said you should kill them. You should kill them and teach a lesson to those folks in the South don't send your slave catchers here because we're going to shoot them dead in the street. This is not even Gaza. Gaza is nonviolence.
Mm-hmm.
The idea that this is even debatable, the idea that it's even controversial,
Mm-hmm.
shows the insanity, the lunacy of the discussion when it comes to the people of Gaza. It's unspeakable. And when I read that in Douglas, because I was thinking of exactly the same article, I was going to write Jamie, who's a terrific guy. He's a little older than you, he's 30, but really bright, vibrant. I like a lot of people in your generation. I have a real high regard for Crystal Ball. I mean, you know who she is?
Yeah.
Yeah, she's really terrific. Sagar's good too, but he's not in her category quite yet. Jamie, I wanted to write to him. I still mean to. I'll probably do it today now that it came up. To say, Jamie, I feel really good that we wrote that article, that we put on record. The only sane question is, do concentration camp guards have the right to shoot dead people who are trying to flee a concentration camp? And whether in all the reports, even the good reports, the only question that arises is Israel using disproportionate force? Is Israel using indiscriminate force? Is Israel targeting them?
Right.
Whereas, to my mind, the only question is, does Israel have the right to use any force? Whether it's proportionate or disproportionate, discriminate or indiscriminate, targeted or not targeted, they have the right to use any force. How can you have the right to use force to confine people in a concentration camp? Does that make any sense? Does it make any sense? I can't understand these things. I really can't. You're going to tell me my father didn't have the right to use force to break out of Auschwitz? Are you going to tell me that? No, it's crazy. It just burns me up. It burns my innards, makes my innards writhe when I hear this kind of nonsense, that people are incapable of the most elementary moral calculus. They're incapable of it. All right, I think we should leave it at that, because I went on at such length that I'm rivaling now Castro. So I think you got your program.
All right.
We covered a lot of ground. I said a lot of new things today, which I haven't said before. So you'll have your exclusive.
Thank you.
We really appreciate doing this. Thank you.
Okay. So best of luck to you guys. And